Did you know that God can use your past and the present to shape and mold your future and turn you into who you are today? The guest that I have on Shasta's journey is here to share how she is living proof that God can take your trials and turn them into testimonies, and God can take your messes and turn them into messages. Her name is Anissa Bustos, and I'm so excited to introduce her. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. We're actually connected through a friend, Julia Jones. How did you meet Julia?
You know what? I had heard that there was a bridal store, and I knew about it. But then just through Facebook, Instant Messenger, being connected, one day I got this friend request. And I thought, I don't know who this person is, but she's connected a whole bunch of people I know. So I thought I'll go ahead and accept it. And then from that point, I just started seeing a couple of her posts, and I just fell in love with her boldness.
Aww.
Just through a video she posted. So
isn't it amazing how the people in our life impact us so much?
Absolutely.
It truly is. How did you end up here in Tuolumne, right? Is that where you're from?
Yeah, I'm up in Miwok.
Have you always been there?
No, actually I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, California, just in southern, which is just a little bit 2 hours north of LA. And so basically I spent 36 years there in Santa Barbara.
Wow.
Then moved to Arizona, and then eventually made my way back to Santa Barbara to help take care of my grandma who had dementia. Mm-hmm. And then after that, I just felt that it was time to leave my hometown and just move on to someplace else. And just through a series of events, getting a temporary contract job in Modesto, and knowing a friend up in Sonora, I went to visit, and then I ended up going to a church event. And from that point, I just really felt God really pulling me to the mountain. And I'd always dreamed of living in the mountains. I just never thought, it wasn't really on my radar to think, I'm going to go live in the mountains. But I just knew He was pulling me there. And so at that point, everything just kind of unfolded. And I landed up in the Miwok, Sonora area in the fall of 2018.
Okay, so you've been here for a while.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. I've always been a small town girl. I've always lived in towns with just one blinking light. What's the biggest difference between the city and then here? Have you noticed yourself change at all in the process?
I like a lot the fact that there's not a lot of traffic. Santa Barbara wasn't huge in traffic, but just the fact that there is mountains and people now, I see traffic and it's like, that's not really traffic, but yet for me it now has become traffic.
Like when they're doing road construction?
Yes,
like, oh,
cutting
traffic.
The trees. Yeah, exactly. Tree cutters. Just out-of-towners that come up for the beauty, the beauty that the mountains provide. Mm-hmm. So people want to come up from the city and come up to the mountains for the weekend. I'm like, why is there more traffic here? It's like, oh, that's right, people are visiting this weekend.
I love seeing people's reaction, though, of when they see where we live, because we get so used to it and it's so easy to take it for granted. But when you see other people's reactions, it's like, you know what, it is beautiful. I am lucky to live here.
Exactly. That's how Santa Barbara was for me. It was known as the American Riviera. And to me, it was my hometown where I grew up, and I barely did any of the tourist things. But people are like, you're so lucky to live there. I'm thinking, it's just my hometown. So you kind of get spoiled by just expecting it's going to be there when you want it until you're gone or whatever.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
I went to Nashville in November, and that same thing. I'm like, this is the coolest place ever. And everybody's there like,
Exactly.
It's Nashville.
Exactly. Yeah.
You mentioned that you went to a church event. Were you a believer before then, or did that kind of like spark your faith to where it is now?
No, actually, I'm 48 years old right now, but I became a Christian in 1986 when I was 14. But I was raised in the Catholic Church, so I was exposed to those things. Mm-hmm. But I always knew there was something more, even as like about 10 years old. I knew I didn't quite understand some of the traditional things that I was going through in the Catholic Church, and so I really started just as a child in between myself and God of saying, well, why am I doing this? I don't understand. Why are they doing that? And I'd ask questions, and most of the time they're just like, well, that's just how we do it. And my 10-year-old brain really couldn't handle that. I was like, you need to tell me why.
What's it like questioning your faith? Because I know so many people who have gone through that similar thing, whether they were brought up in a different faith or whether they grew up in a certain faith, but their parents believed it, so they felt that they had to believe it as well. Mm-hmm. What's that internal process of like questioning everything around you?
The internal process for me was I just wanted answers, and in my 10-year-old brain, I just had this I guess it was the innate thing that God put in me. I just knew God was going to give it to me. I was like, if I'm going to ask a question, then if that person can't answer it, then God, you better answer it. And I just had that childlike faith at 10 years old. It may even started when I was 8, that I just knew that it's like, I want to know these things. And for me, it came natural. It wasn't anything I had to struggle with, which some people may understand and some people not. I just knew that I wanted to know the truth. And even though I didn't quite know as a child what the truth was, I just knew that God would have an answer, even though I couldn't see him.
And what happened after you found that truth that you were looking for?
Well, really, it actually pushed me to know what the people, like for me, in the Catholic faith, there was certain protocols that they wanted me to follow. And one of them was confirmation. And that was where I had to ask, what does confirmation mean? And they basically said, well, that means that you're agreeing to everything that the church believes. But prior to that, every time I'd ask questions, some of them didn't know how to give me an answer. They just said, that's just what it is. And for my 12, 13-year-old brain, it went, well, if you don't know it, then why am I going to agree to something that you don't know either? And I don't understand. So it was just one of those things where I just went, okay, God, that I'm done. And so I just told my mom, I don't want to do this anymore. And somehow, because of, I guess, being just a good kid, my mom just said, well, I'm not going to force you to do something you don't want to do. And so she gave me that freedom to just kind of, my parents gave me that freedom to just, okay, well, you don't have to go to church anymore. And at that point, I got invited to another church, and that's when I became a Christian when I was 14. I just understood. All of a sudden, my questions got answered.
What was that like, believing and following something that your parents weren't?
Initially, I think it was a little bit of a struggle because I had family that were kind of questioning my parents of why are you letting her make a decision she needs to listen to you at whatever level that was. I just knew that my parents just allowed me the freedom to do that. And, at times it was kind of like people would pick me up and take me to church or to youth group because my parents, were not going to that church. So, and that was, people who loved me, who wanted a relationship, with me, said, oh, I'll just pick you up, no big deal, and got permission from my parents and brought me to the Sunday school in the morning and to the church. And then later on, my parents followed, and they started going to the church, and, they became Christians as well, So
it actually brought you closer together with your parents than drawing you guys apart.
Yeah.
Well,
Absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And what kind of trials and tribulations have you been through since becoming a Christian that you feel like shapes your faith that it is now?
I think most of all is the trials was doing what I knew was right, because I think, again, it gets back to people tell you what to do and you do it because they know better, or maybe they're an adult, or they're a teacher, or they're a pastor. And for me, I wanted to make my own decisions. So the trials that came is when in high school, when people were choosing to go out and party, or go out and be sexually active with, boyfriends and stuff. And it was just like drinking, partying. It's just like, I didn't want that. It didn't seem like it lined up with what God would want me to do. And again, it was just that innate conviction. There were times when it's like, oh, I wish I could go do that. But everything in me, God's like, that's not what I have for you. And it was, I just knew. I knew that wasn't the right way to go.
So being in the world, but not of the world.
Yes, absolutely. And but yet still being friends. And interesting enough, the people that accepted me the most, outside of my church friends, because I did go to church and youth group, but a lot of my friends were older, so I didn't really have the same schedule as them. I really didn't, hang out with them at school. I realized at that point that the people that I kind of wanted to be friends with were the ones that were choosing different life. But at the same time, the ones that were really, really actively, maybe drinking or, doing drugs and stuff, during the day at school, they were the ones that accepted me the most. Because they didn't have a problem when I said no to drinking or no to, smoking something. And when they realized what I was choosing for myself, when someone would say, hey, Anissa, why aren't you doing that? They're like, hey, leave her alone. She doesn't do that. And it was like they became my cheerleaders, because they're like, hey, just come as you are, which to me was freeing, because I'm like, hey, I can hang out with you because you don't pressure me. And to me, that was a freedom that I found instead of the judgment.
Do you feel like I know how the Bible says bad company corrupts good character. Do you feel that hanging out with those people, even though that they did make you feel free, like you weren't being judged, do you feel like it still had some sort of impact on like who you were, like your character then?
For me personally, no. I have to say no. They taught me how to love people where they were instead of trying to pull them to where you want them to be.
That's beautiful.
Because they didn't force me to want or make me feel bad for not doing what they were doing. Just like, oh yeah, you can hang with us. You know, I didn't go to the parties, but during the day, they just let me.
Normal person.
I was just the normal person.
What advice do you have for people who have found themselves in that predicament, whether they are in the workplace and their coworkers are doing something, gossiping that they don't really feel like they should be involved in, or somebody who is in high school or middle school who doesn't want to do that thing that the other people are doing? What advice do you have for them to be that light in those groups?
For me, I think the biggest thing is relationship. Because if you find that you have commonality with someone, it's really about focusing on those things. Because you may be completely different in so many ways, but it's like, what is it in them that you can relate to? What is it in them that you can say, hey, you're amazing at this. You're really good at that. I'm not so great at that. You know, I appreciate that about you. I like that you know how to, you know, communicate with people at that level, and I struggle in that, you know, and really being able to find out what it is that they're real good at and edify that, you know, encourage that. And I don't believe that that's for just one age or another. It's any age. I mean, we all know that it feels good to be complimented.
Absolutely.
It feels good to be encouraged, to be loved on, to be remembered, to be thought of. You know, what special things do you know about that person that someone else doesn't know? I know your favorite color. I know your favorite candy. You know, I know what time of year you love or what kind of flower you like. You know, and I think doesn't matter how old you are, you know.
It's kindergartner to 80-year-old.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter.
It's the little things. Even on the past episode that we did of Shasta's journey, we talked about relationships as well and how important it is to not only be vulnerable, but also be together. It's so easy to be caught up in your own thoughts and what's going on in your own life, but those relationships that you talked about, who has God personally put in your life that you truly feel that has helped you become who you are?
Over the years, you mean?
Yeah.
Really? Well, I know for me, every time I think back to my time, like when I became a Christian at 14, I think about the time that I had a youth pastor, and his name was Ralph West. And that man really encouraged us to know who we are, to know what God's word said. And I always remember him saying, you know, he would teach us something, and he goes, hey, make sure I didn't make a mistake. Make sure I didn't miss something. You know, not really make a mistake, but make sure I didn't miss anything. Make sure what I told you actually is from the word of God. And so he always would cause us, maybe even at the end of a teaching or something, it's like, but he would ask a question again. So it's like, oh, I don't know. Like, I better make sure I understood it.
Instead of just believing what somebody told you just because you trust them and trust what they say, and do your own.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful things that he ever did with us, I remember, I don't remember if it was probably the beginning of high school, 9th, 10th grade. I don't know. I think it was summertime. And he actually contacted a lot of different church leaders. I know we had gone to, I think it was Jehovah's Witness church. It might have been a Mormon church as well, Jewish synagogue. Went to a mortuary in the last trip, but over a certain amount of weeks, he actually called up the leaders of those churches that he had friends with and said, hey, I want to bring my students, and I want them to have the freedom to ask you anything they want about what you believe. And really the premises was, so he always wanted to teach us how to respect others, how to honor what they believe, because it's not about us being better than anybody else, it's about us meeting people where they're at, and to know that we have to educate ourselves about what other people believe, because we can't just be like, hey, I'm better than you, I know more than you, have that attitude. And it was always like, how are you going to honor and respect that person when they don't think or believe like you? Because they are a human being, and they have every right to be respected and honored, even if you don't agree, even if you don't. But you need to be able to have that ability to sit across the table from somebody and have a conversation and say, teach me something about you that I don't know, or that maybe we don't believe. Why do you believe it? And so he gave us that freedom over a period of weeks. And really, it was about eternity in the big picture, because our last meeting was going to a mortuary, which was one of the men from our church ran the mortuary. So we really got to see the tangible of what happens to a body after they die, the mortality of it, but yet also the eternity of what we believed.
That is amazing. I've never heard of any other youth pastor or anybody willingly doing that. I know when somebody asks you a question, you're put on the spot, but like just embracing people asking questions. How do you think that mindset and that shift in your ability to communicate with people, even when you don't agree with them, how do you think that has positively affected your relationship since then?
Massively, because I've been able to go into relationships knowing that the chances are 90%, we just know, 99%, 100%, we're never all going to agree on the same thing. That's just a fact. And I think because I was trained that way, raised that way, and I say trained loosely because the reality is I'm not a robot. And I will go into situations, some people are like, I didn't expect that from you. Like, oh, you thought you knew me. You actually didn't. But that's okay, I'll give you some grace, It really trained me to know that I can't expect the world to revolve around me, really. I can't expect that.
What areas do you feel like you still struggle with? Because, sitting over here, like, I don't know you personally, but from here, it looks like you're doing great. Like, you know how to interact with people, you know how to be respectful and loving, but what areas do you feel that you need to personally work on?
I think the biggest thing for me is being able to sit with people who judge. That is a hard thing for me to really be able to sit with somebody and sit where they are judging people. Because then I have to really look at the mirror of myself and go, ooh, where is this discernment? Where is this wisdom? And where is this healthy judgment? And where is it complete judgment that I have no business taking part in? So for me, that's the biggest struggle, is really being able to self-monitor myself of when am I stepping over the line, of am I judging and is it unhealthy? Am I using my wisdom? Am I using discernment? That is a slippery slope that I'm always constantly. It's a very fine line.
It's a fine line.
And it's but also I have found out that over time God has used that to really keep me in places that He has a really a tight rein on me in a good way. It's like, Anissa, don't go there. You're moving into a place that's my place. It's like, but I thought it was mine, It's like, no, that's not yours. Come on back here.
Gotta give everything.
Exactly.
You're like, oh, well, you can have this, but you can't really have this.
Yeah.
Being able to recognize that is powerful, though, because that shows like maturity spiritually, because a lot of people don't want to recognize that they have stuff they need to work on. And over the years in your faith, how have you come to know your personal identity in Christ? Because it's different from your identity in the world, but how has that shaped your relationships as well?
In regards to being understanding who I am,
yes,
and walking in my identity,
exactly.
For me, I think my identity is something that I think all of us at times struggle with. I think the biggest thing is stepping into knowing when I'm trying to create my own identity and when I'm actually being obedient to who God's called me to be. And that's not easy either, because it's one of those things where it's like, God, I know this is who you made me to be, but nothing feels like that right now. And the outside influences don't feel like it's really drawing me into who I know you said I am. And so really struggling with those pressures has been a struggle. However, at the same time, I am fiercely bold when someone tries to tell me who I am. And it's like...
You're like, I know who I am, thank you.
Yeah, I know who I am. I know the choices I've made. I know the convictions that God has placed on my heart and the things that He's called me to. And I think sometimes the hardest part is holding back when I'm supposed to hold back and then rushing in.
You want to go full range?
I do. I want to go full force. And I realize that I can't go full force in areas that He hasn't given me permission to go to yet. And so that's been a... So
you're a doer at heart, even though you're a dreamer too.
Yeah, very much so.
That's
very
good.
much so.
And what types of things do you feel like you're called to do in terms of serving God?
Well, serving God really is to be a voice to the people who feel alone. Because over the years when I was asking those questions, there were times when I felt like I was just alone. It's like, what, is anybody else asking these questions? Because it doesn't feel like it. Or I don't hear anybody asking those questions. And so one of the biggest things that I have been walking in since I became a Christian is a life of purity. So I have chosen to save myself for what I believe is to be my future husband. And that has been something that has been a deliberate choice. And I think some people look at that and they will say, oh, well, you're missing out. Or you have chosen something that maybe you just, maybe, are you sure you should do that? Even people, believers have asked me, oh, then you must be called to be single. And it's like, no. But thanks for thinking about that. That's really great that you're thinking about that. But realistically, it's like I know that God called me to purity when He called me to serve Him. And some people go, oh, well then, you won't ever be in a place where you could see somebody who hasn't saved themselves for their future wife. And I said, that's the farthest from the truth. Because it's not my time, it's not my place to judge. And God saves anybody, and God can renew anything. And I think the biggest thing in the world right now is purity of heart. Because whether you're a believer or not, the reality is there's people that I've met that are not believers that have such a purity of love in them that I'm like, wow, like you really you know what it is that you really want. You know what your desire of whatever their goals are, whatever their dreams are. And they are really pushing full force into them. And there's a purity to that. And I like to look at purity from just all different perspectives because I can appreciate people's choices.
It's more than just a physical
It's
thing.
totally
Purity,
more than physical. And it's just the purity of being intentional. Relationships. You can be very pure in your intentions. And I think that's one of the things that God's called me to. There's a purity far beyond the choices I made in the physical that I believe can be celebrated. And I think so many people want to just say, oh, well, I messed up. I can't get... No, don't do that. You can make another choice. You can do things different.
Yeah. I mean, I know personally, I have definitely messed up in the past, but what I've realized is that those things don't have to define you.
Exactly.
You can move on and push forward, and just like purity is something that you don't have to start at the beginning of your life and say, I'm going to live a life called to purity. It is something that you can pick up at any time during your walk and in your journey of life. And whether that is a physical purity or even a mental purity or whatever it may be, just choosing. It's a choice. And that doesn't mean that you're going to always get it right. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And just like being a Christian or being Catholic, that's a choice. It's not always easy, but I believe that it's worth it. And that's why I live my life to interview people and to hear their stories, because I love what you're able to give to this world, and I believe that your voice is powerful, and that God is speaking through you. And so it's a beautiful thing. Do you see yourself like turning it into like a ministry, or like where do you see yourself here in the next year or so?
I think if anything is I want people to have a voice. That's really my biggest thing. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like in regards to ministry. My heart is for anybody who's been broken. And it's not my job to fix them. It's not my job to heal them, but it's my job to come alongside and edify and encourage and try to get them going in the direction that they know they want to be. They want to be headed to, and I don't believe that God has called me just to people who are believers.
No.
I have amazing friends that are completely different than me in what they believe, and even sometimes some of what they do in their life.
And there's not many people who are able to do that. I can see you as a mentor, without a doubt.
Yeah, so I'm at that place now where it's like, okay, wherever you want me, God, I will go. However you're going to use me. I have had the opportunities over the years to be in, convalescent homes ministering. I've been in and out of juvenile halls, helping mentor, helping go through the court system.
Wow.
I've been with friends who have been suicidal, and I've been on mental health wards, psychiatric holds. It's taken me there in a lot of different ways. And I've been with foster children. I've had friends who have been abused, physically, sexually, verbally. God's had me walk alongside of people since I was 12 or 13 years old, of just being their friend and being there for them. And so what God has gifted me with is a lot of opportunity and that's why, I said earlier about purity. I've had people share things with me that some people can't handle hearing.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is God gave me the purity of heart to be able to say, it's okay, I love you. It's okay, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's okay, and I'm going to sit with you, or I'm going to walk with you, or I'm going to go attend a drug rehabilitation, which I've gone through. I did a drug rehabilitation with a single mother whose family didn't want to come alongside her. And she wanted someone to just sit with her. And so I went through that drug rehab program with her as a mentor, and as it turned out, and to be a friend, and to be someone who could be trusted with her stories. Just like people come to you because they trust you to handle their stories.
Yeah.
And it's a gift to be trusted with someone's stories.
Absolutely.
So
I would not take it for granted whatsoever. Mm-hmm. The amount of people who have sat on this set and have shared their most vulnerable moments in their life, and just the transparency that it takes. It's hard, but there's freedom in it. There's freedom in it. And the power behind it to teach, heal, or inspire others. And just like you said, you have a lot to work on, but you embrace the areas that people do well in, and you also embrace the areas that you do well in. How can people get in contact with you? We only have like 2 minutes left, but if they want to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
The easiest way right now is just to find me on Instagram. I just said at Miss Anissa Live. You can direct message me, or obviously leave a comment. But that's probably the best way right now. I'm still working on building a website and really moving forward in other areas and that. But.
Well, I would love to help you out. I think what's on your heart is incredible, and please keep it up. And thank you for sharing your story on this episode. Do you have any other advice before we?
I think the last thing, I know you just got a few seconds left, is just to be yourself. Don't be afraid or be ashamed of your story. Because when people hear your stories, it gives them hope. And you may find that you tell your story, and months later someone's going to say, hey, because you shared your story and you went through it and you survived, I held on and I fought to stay and continue that fight in my own life. So it's really just don't be ashamed of your story.
Beautiful words. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and also I want to thank you for watching Shasta's journey and supporting me in this. I can't wait to see what God's doing in your life. Please go to shastasjourney.com, share your story, reach out. I'd love to pray with you, and start binge watching some episodes, because there's tons of stories that you can watch. God bless.